particle can be over here or over there, but in quantum mechanics it can be over here and over there at the same time. And you have these states which involve a superposition in some sense of different locations for that particle. And then he got out his piece of chalk. Some people say he broke it in two as a kind of illustration of how the piece of chalk might be over here and over there at the same time. And he was talking about this, and my mind wandered. I don't remember what he said. All I can remember, he's just moved on to the next topic, and something about energy he'd mentioned, which I have no idea what it had to do with anything. And so I'd been struck with this and worried about it ever since. It's probably just as well I didn't hear his explanation, because it was probably one of these things to calm me down and not worry about it anymore. Whereas in my case, I've worried about it ever since. So I thought, maybe that's the catch. There is something in quantum mechanics where these superpositions become one or the other.
I don't really remember the tutorial
and
for this guy, but I know like R and F are kind of the two keys.
There's something missing
that's about
in the theory. The theory is incomplete. It's not just incomplete, it's in a certain sense not quite right. Because if you follow the equation, the basic equation of quantum mechanics, that's the Schrödinger equation, you could put that on a computer too. There are lots of difficulties about how many parameters you have to put in, so on. That can be very tricky, but nevertheless, it is a computational process. Modulo this question about the continuum as before, but it's not clear that makes any difference.
So our theories of quantum mechanics may be missing the same element that the universal Turing machine is missing about consciousness.
Yeah, this is the view I held, is that you need a theory, and that what people call the reduction of the state or the collapse of the wave function, which you have to have, otherwise quantum mechanics doesn't relate to the world we see. To make it relate to the world we see, you've got to break the Schrödinger equation. Schrödinger himself was absolutely appalled by this idea, his own equation. I mean, that's why he introduced this famous Schrödinger's cat as a thought experiment. He's really saying, look, this is where my equation leads you into it. There's something wrong, something we haven't understood, which is basically fundamental. And so I was trying to put all these things together and said, well, it's got to be the non-computability comes in there. And I also can't quite remember when I thought this, but it's when gravity is involved in quantum mechanics. It's the combination of those two, and it's that point when you have good reasons to believe, this came much later, but I have good reason to believe that the principles of general relativity and those of quantum mechanics, most particularly, it's the basic principle of equivalence, which goes back to Galileo. If you fall freely, you eliminate the gravitational field. So you imagine Galileo dropping his big rock and his little rock from the Leaning Tower, whether he actually ever did that or not, it's pretty irrelevant. And as the rocks fall to the ground, you have a little insect sitting on one of them looking at the other one. And it seems to think, oh, there's no gravity here. Of course, it hits the ground and then you realize something different's going on. But when it's in free fall, the gravity has been eliminated. Galileo understood that very beautifully. He gives these wonderful examples of fireworks. When you see the fireworks and explode and you see the sphere of sparkling fireworks, it remains a sphere as it falls down, as though there were no gravity. So he understood that principle, but he couldn't make a theory out of it. Einstein came along, used exactly the same principle, and that's the basis of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Now, there is a conflict. This is something I did much later, so this wasn't those days. Much later. You can see there is a basic conflict between the principle of superposition, the thing that Dirac was talking about, and the principle of general covariance. Principle of equivalence. Gravitational field is equivalent to an acceleration.
Can you pause for a second? What is the principle of equivalence?
It's this Galileo principle that you can eliminate, at least locally. You have to be in a small neighborhood, because if you have people dropping rocks all around the world somewhere, you can't get rid of it all at once. But in the local neighborhood, you can eliminate the gravitational field by falling freely with it. And we now see that with astronauts, and they don't, the Earth is right there. You can see the great globe of the Earth right beneath them. But they don't care about it. As far as they're concerned, there's no gravity. They fall freely in the gravitational field, and that gets rid of the gravitational field. And that's the principle of equivalence.
So what's the contradiction? What's the tension with superposition and
Well, that's
equivalence?
technical.
Well, but so just to backtrack for a second, just to see if we can weave a thread through it all.
Yes.
So we were started to think about consciousness as potentially needing some of the same, not mystical, but some of the same magic.
You see, it is a complicated story. So you know, people think, oh, I'm drifting away from the point or something. But I think it is a complicated story. So what I'm trying to say, and I try to put it in a nutshell, it's not so easy. I'm trying to say that whatever consciousness is, it's not a computation.
Yes.
Or it's not a physical process which can be described by computation.
But it nevertheless could be. So one of the interesting models that you've proposed is the orchestrated objective reduction.
Yes,
which
well,
is
you see, that's going from there, you see. So I say I have no idea. So I wrote this book. Through my scientific career, I thought, you know, when I'm retired, I'll have enough time to write a sort of a popularish book, which I will explain my ideas and puzzles, what I like, beautiful things about physics and mathematics, and this puzzle about computability and consciousness and so on. And in the process of writing this book, well, I thought I'd do it when I was retired. I didn't actually. I didn't wait that long because there was a radio discussion between Edward Fredkin and Marvin Minsky, and they were talking about what computers could do, and they were entering a big room. They imagined entering this big room. At the other end of the room, two computers were talking to each other, and as you walk up to the computers, they will have communicated to each other more ideas, concepts, things than the entire human race had ever done. So I thought, well, I know where you're coming from, but I just don't believe you. There's something missing. So I thought, well, I should write my book. And so I did. It was at roughly the same time Stephen Hawking was writing his Brief History of Time. And
in the 80s at some point. The book you're talking about is The Emperor's New Mind.
Emperor's New Mind, that's right.
And both are incredible books, The Brief History of Time and Emperor's New Mind.
Yes, it was quite interesting because he told me he'd got Carl Sagan, I think, to write a foreword.
Good get.
To the book, you see. So I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to get anywhere unless I get somebody. So I thought, oh, I know Martin Gardner, so I wonder if he'd do it. So he did, and he did a very nice foreword.
So that's an incredible book, and some of the same people you mentioned, Ed Franken, which I guess of expert systems fame, and Minsky, of course, people know in the AI world, but they represent the artificial intelligence
Absolutely,
world
that's right.
that do hope and dream that AI's intelligence is.
That's right. Well, you see, it was my thinking. Well, you know, I see where they're coming from, and from that
disagree.
perspective,
Oh.
yeah, you're right. But that's not my perspective. So I thought I had to say it. And as I was writing my book, you see, I thought, well, I don't really know anything about neurophysiology. What am I doing writing this book? So I started reading up about neurophysiology. And I read up, and I was trying to find out how it is that nerve signals could possibly preserve quantum coherence. And all I read is that the electrical signals which go along the nerves create effects through the brain. There's no chance you can isolate it. So I thought, this is hopeless. So I come to the end of the book, and I more or less give up. I just think of something which I didn't believe in. Maybe this is a way around it, but no. And then you see, I thought, well, maybe this book will at least stimulate young people to do science or something. And I got all these letters from old retired people instead.
When I play demons, I get wrecked. When I play Slayer, I get wrecked.
It's all just like zipping around. Everything's so fast.
Yeah. I mean, I beat the game on Nightmare or whatever the hardest difficulty is before, like, when you only have one life. And I seem to do fine there, but multiplayer just fucks me. I think I got one more game before I get my achievement.
I don't know. I didn't think I did either. Maybe it's a loadout thing?
What? Me being terrible?
The Oh, the BFG.
I think the achievement, you get 40,000 XP if you do 5 battle matches. Like, if you go in game and you press tab, you can check weekly achievements. One of them is like do 5 battle modes or something like that. Fucking God damn it. Fuck.
Round lost.
I think part of it is I'm using my weapon wheel with Q. I need to bind them to my member keys. God damn it. Finally, fuck.
Round one. Round three.
There we go.
Round one.
I'm really good at standing in the fire.
The only people who could had time to read my book,
So I mean, but
except for Stuart Hameroff.
except for Stuart Hameroff.
Stuart Hameroff wrote to me and he said, "I think you're missing something. You don't know about microtubules, do you?" He didn't put it quite like that, but that was more or less it. And he said, "This is what you really need to consider." So I thought, my God, yes, that's a much more promising structure.
So I mean, fundamentally, you were searching for the source of non-computable source of consciousness within the human brain,
Yeah.
in the biology. And so,
Yeah.
what are if I may ask, what are microtubules?
Well, you see, I was ignorant in what I'd read. I never came across them in the books I looked at. Perhaps I only read rather superficially, which is true. But I didn't know about microtubules. Stuart, I think one of the things that impressed him about them is when you see pictures of mitosis, that's a cell dividing, and you see all the chromosomes, and the chromosomes all get lined up and then they get pulled apart. And so that as the cell divides, half the chromosomes divide into two parts, and they go two different ways. And what is it that's pulling them apart? Well, those are these little things called microtubules. And so he started to get interested in them, and he formed the view. Well, had his day job or night job or whatever you call it is to put people to sleep, except he doesn't like calling it sleep because it's different. General anesthetics in a reversible way. So you want to make sure that they don't experience the pain that would otherwise be something that they
I
feel.
don't know how Gebel responds.
And consciousness
so quickly.
is turned off for a while, and it can be turned back on again. So it's crucial that you can turn it off and turn it on. And what do you do when you're doing that? What do general anesthetic gases do? And see, he formed the view that it's the microtubules that they affect. And the details of why he formed that view is not altogether clear to me, but there's an interesting story he keeps talking about. But I found this very exciting because I thought these structures, these little tubes, which inhabit pretty well all cells, it's not just neurons. Apart from red blood cells, they inhabit pretty well all the other cells in the body. But they're not all the same kind. You get different kinds of microtubules. And the ones that excited me the most, this may still not be totally clear, but the ones that excited me most were the only ones that I knew about at the time, because they're very, very symmetrical structures. And I had reason to believe that these very symmetrical structures would be much better at preserving a quantum state, quantum coherence, preserving the thing without... You just need to preserve certain degrees of freedom without them leaking into the environment. Once they leak into the environment, you're lost.
Oh,
So you've got to preserve these quantum states at a level which the state reduction process comes in, and that's where I think the non-computability comes in.
Thank you, sir. I didn't even look at that.
I've had about enough of this.
Yeah.
Remain calm. You may notice a slight change in the environment. Fear not.
The Super Gornest location is nearby. This is the site where the invasion began, the oldest and most corrupted location on the planet. The Ark fought hard, but they were eventually driven out by the demons.
Really wants to die.
Remember, demon can be an offensive term. Refer to them as mortally challenged. Earth is the melting pot of the universe.
Keys will be required to open the passage. Find them.
Sometimes evolution just needs a little push.
God damn it.
This is the heart of the nest. It has taken root in this facility's main power generator. Reactivating the generator will destroy the nest.
Don't be afraid. Once your soul has been consumed, your fear will cease to exist.
You now have access to the heart chamber.
Oh, left side.
The generator is in a dormant state. Two nearby control turrets will need to be manually activated to restore full power. Unlocking the left terminal room now. Terminal still requires activation to
Ask
destroy the
not
nest.
what we can for you. Ask what you can do.
I'm unable to open the door to the second terminal at this time. You'll need to find an alternate route.
Fucking kidding me?
The UAC. Your blood sacrifice today makes for a better tomorrow.
fuck. Eddie. What is up with you? Alright, time to lose some lives. Out of this with 8 lives, maybe. Out of here.
fortified barrier has opened. This air shaft will provide access to the generator's control terminal. The generator is now at full power. You can now use the main console to destroy the heart. The generator is overloading. Mark your exit portal.
Warning, main generator overload. I repeat, main generator overload. Please proceed to the nearest emergency exit. This facility will self-destruct shortly. Please save your work and walk calmly to the nearest exit.
And it's the measurement process in quantum mechanics, what's going on.
So something about the measurement process and what's going on, something about the structure of the microtubules.
Yes.
Your intuition says maybe there's something here. Maybe this kind of structure allows for the mystery of the.
There was a much
quantum
better
mechanics.
chance, yes. It just struck me that partly it was the symmetry, because there is a feature of symmetry. You can preserve quantum coherence much better with symmetrical structures. There's a good reason for that. And that impressed me a lot. I didn't know the difference between the A lattice and B lattice at that time, which could be important. Now that's an issue which isn't talked about much.
But that's in some sense details. We've got to take a step back just to say, in case people are not familiar. So this was called the orchestrated objective reduction idea, or OR, which is a biological philosophy of mind that postulates that consciousness originates at the quantum level inside neurons. So that has to do with your search for where is it coming from. So that's counter to the notion that consciousness might arise from the computation performed by the synapses.
Yes,
So,
the key point. See, sometimes people say it's because it's quantum mechanical. It's not just that. See, it's more outrageous than that. You see, this is one reason I think we're so far off from it, because we don't even know the physics right. You see, it's not just quantum mechanics. People say, quantum systems and biological structures. No, William's starting to see that some basic biological systems does depend on quantum. I mean, look, in the first place, all of chemistry is quantum mechanics. People got used to that, so they don't count that. So he said, let's not count quantum chemistry. We sort of got the hang of that, I think. But you have quantum effects, which are not just chemical, in photosynthesis. And this is one of the striking things in the last several years, that photosynthesis seems to be a basically quantum process, which is not simply chemical. It's using quantum mechanics in a very basic way. So you could start saying, with photosynthesis is based on quantum mechanics, why not behavior of neurons and things like that? Maybe there's something which is a bit like photosynthesis in that respect. But what I'm saying is even more outrageous than that, because those things are talking about conventional quantum mechanics. Now, my argument says that conventional quantum mechanics, if you're just following the Schrödinger equation, that's still computable. So you've got to go beyond that. So you've got to go to where quantum mechanics goes wrong in a certain sense. You have to be a little bit careful about that, because the way people do quantum mechanics is a sort of mixture of two different processes. One of them is the Schrödinger equation, which is an equation which Schrödinger wrote down, and it tells you how the state of a system evolves. And it evolves according to this equation, completely deterministic, but it evolves into ridiculous situations. And this was what Schrödinger was very much pointing out with his cat. He said, you follow my equation, that's Schrödinger's equation, and you could say that you have to a cat which is dead and alive at the same time. That would be the evolution of the Schrödinger equation, would lead to a state which is the cat being dead and alive at the same time. And he's more or less saying this is an absurdity. People nowadays say, oh, well, Schrödinger said you can have a cat which is dead and alive. It's not that. See, he was saying this is an absurdity. There's something missing. And that the reduction of the state or the collapse of the wave function or whatever it is something which has to be understood. It's not following the Schrödinger equation. It's not the way we conventionally do quantum mechanics. There's something more than that. And it's easy to quote authority here because Einstein, at least three of the greatest physicists of the 20th century who were very fundamental in developing quantum mechanics, Einstein one of them, Schrödinger another, Dirac another. You have to look carefully at Dirac's writing because he didn't tend to say this out loud very much because he was very cautious about what he said. You find the right place and you see he says quantum mechanics is a provisional theory. We need something which explains the collapse of the wave function. We need to go beyond the theory we have now. I happen to be one of the kinds of people, there's a whole group of people, they're all considered to be bit mavericks, who believe that quantum mechanics needs to be modified. There's a small minority of those people, which are already a minority, who think that the way in which it's modified has to be with gravity.
Okay, Google.
And there is an even smaller minority of those people who think it's a particular way that I think it is, you see. So
those are the quantum gravity folks. But what's
you see, quantum gravity is already not this. Because when you say quantum gravity, what you really mean is quantum mechanics applied to gravitational theory. So you say, let's take this wonderful formalism of quantum mechanics and make gravity fit into it. So that is what quantum gravity is meant to be. Now I'm saying you've got to be more even-handed, that gravity affects the structure of quantum mechanics too. It's not just you quantize gravity. You've got to gravitize quantum mechanics. And it's a two-way thing.
But then when do you even get started? So that you're saying that we have to figure out a totally new ideas in that.
Exactly. No, you're stuck. You don't have a theory. That's the trouble. So this is a big problem. If you say, okay, well, what's the theory? I don't know.
So we may be in the very early days, sort of.
It is in the very early days, isn't it? But I'm just making this point.
Yeah.
You see, Stuart Hameroff tends to be, Penrose says that it's got to be a reduction of the state and so let's use it. The trouble is Penrose doesn't say that. Penrose says, well, I think that. But
Yeah, right.
we have no experiments as yet which show it's that. There are experiments which are being thought through and which I'm hoping will be performed. There is an experiment which is being developed by Dirk Bouwmeester, who I've known for a long time, who shares his time between Leiden in the Netherlands and Santa Barbara in the US. And he's been working on an experiment which could perhaps demonstrate that quantum mechanics as we now understand it, if you don't bring in the gravitational effects, has to be modified.
And then there's also experiments that are underway that kind of look at the microtubule side of things to see if there's, in the biology, you could see something like that. Could you briefly mention it? Because that's a really sort of one of the only experimental attempts in the very early days of even thinking about consciousness.
I think there's a very serious area here, which is what Stuart Hameroff is doing, and I think it's very important. One of the few places that you can really get a bit of a handle on what consciousness is what turns it off. And when you're thinking about general anesthetics, it's very specific. These things turn consciousness off. What the hell do they do? Well, Stewart and a number of people who work with him and others happen to believe that the general anesthetics directly affect microtubules. And there is some evidence for this. I don't know how strong it is and how watertight the case is, but I think there is some evidence pointing in that kind of direction. It's not just an ordinary chemical process, there's something quite different about it. And one of the main candidates is that these anesthetic gases do affect directly microtubules. And how strong that evidence is, I wouldn't get in a position to say. But I think there is fairly impressive evidence.
And the point is, the
direction.
experiments are being undertaken, which is...
I mean, that
which
is experimental. It's a very clear direction where you can think of experiments which could indicate whether or not it's really microtubules which the anesthetic gases directly affect.
That's really exciting. One of the sad things is, as far as from my outside perspective, is not many people are working on this. So there's a very, like with Stewart, it feels like there's very few people are carrying the flag forward on this.
I think it's not many in the sense it's a minority, but it's not zero anymore. You see, when Stewart and I were originally talking about this, we were just us and a few of our friends. There weren't many people taking it, but it's grown into one of the main viewpoints. There might be about 4 or 5 or 6 different views which people hold, and it's one of them. So it's considered as one of the possible lines of thinking, yes.
You describe physics theories as falling into one of 3 categories: the superb, the useful, or the tentative. I like those words. It's a beautiful categorization. Do you think we will ever have a superb theory of intelligence and of consciousness?
We might. We're a long way from it. I don't think we're in the tentative scale. I mean, it's...
You don't think we've even entered the realm of tentative?
Probably not. I think
yeah, that's right.
No, when you see this so controversial, we don't have a clear view which is accepted by a majority. I mean, you see, people. Most views are computational in one form or another. I think it's some, but it's not very clear because even the IIT people who think of them as computational, but I've heard them say no, consciousness is supposed to be not computational. I say, well, if it's not computational, what the hell is it? What's going on? What physical processes are going on which are that?
What does it mean for something to be computational then? So,
well, there has to be a process which is... You see, it's very curious the way the history has developed in quantum mechanics. Because very early on, people thought there was something to do with consciousness, but it was almost the other way around. You see, you have to say the Schrödinger equation says all these different alternatives happen all at once, and then when is it that only one of them happens? Well, one of the views, which was quite commonly held by a few distinguished quantum physicists, is when a conscious being looks at the system or becomes aware of it, and at that point, it becomes one or the other. That's a role where consciousness is somehow actively reducing the state. My view is almost the exact opposite of that. It's the state reduces itself in some way, some non-computational way, which we don't understand, we don't have a proper theory of, and that is the building block of what consciousness is. So consciousness is the other way around. It depends on that choice which nature makes all the time, when the state becomes one or the other rather than the superposition of one and the other. And when that happens, there is what we're saying now, an element of proto-consciousness takes place. Proto-consciousness is, roughly speaking, the building block out of which actual consciousness is constructed. So you have these proto-conscious elements, which are when the state decides to do one thing or the other. And that's the thing which, when organized together, that's the OR part in OR. But the ORC part, that's the OR part, at least one can see where one's driving as a theory. You can say it's the quantum choice of going this way or that way. But the ORC part, which is the orchestration of this, is much more mysterious. And how does the brain somehow orchestrate all these individual OR processes into a genuine conscious experience?
And it might be something that's beautifully simple, but we're completely in the dark about.
Yeah, I think at the moment that's the thing. We happily put the word orc down there. You say orchestrated, but that's even more unclear what that really means.
Just like the word material, orchestrated.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes.
And we've been dancing a little bit between the word intelligence or understanding and consciousness. Do you kind of see those as sitting in the same space of mystery as we're
Yes, well, you see, I tend to say you have understanding and intelligence and awareness. And somehow understanding is in the middle of it, you see. I like to say, could you say of an entity that is actually intelligent if it doesn't have the quality of understanding? Like I say, I'm using terms I don't even know how to define. But who cares? I'm just relating them.
They're somewhat poetic, so if I somehow understand them.
Yes. That's right, we don't, exactly.
But they're not mathematical in nature.
Yes, you see, as a mathematician, I don't know how to define any of them, but at least I can point to the connections. So the idea is intelligence is something which I believe needs understanding. Otherwise, you wouldn't say it's really intelligence. And understanding needs awareness. Otherwise, you wouldn't really say it's understanding. Do you say of an entity that understands something, unless it's really aware of it, in our normal usage? So there's a three sort of awareness, understanding, and intelligence. And I just tend to concentrate on understanding because that's where I can say something. And that's the Gödel theorem, things like that. But what does it mean to perceive the color blue or something? I mean, it's obvious. It's a much more difficult question. I mean, is it the same if I see a color blue and you see it? Or if you're somebody with this condition, what is it called?
Or where you assign like a sound to a color.
Yeah, that's right. You get colors and sounds mixed up, and that sort of thing. I mean, an interesting subject. I mean,
but from the physics perspective, from the fundamentals perspective, we don't.
I think we're way off having much understanding what's going on there.
In your 2010 book, Cycles of Time, you suggest that another universe may have existed before the Big Bang. Can you describe this idea? First of all, what is the Big Bang? Sounds like a funny word.
Yes.
And what may have been there before it?
Yes. Just as a matter of terminology, I don't like to call it another universe. Because when you have another universe, you think of it kind of quite separate from us. But these things, they're not separate. Now, the Big Bang, conventional theory. You see, I was actually brought up in the sense that when I started getting interested in cosmology, there was a thing called the steady state model, which was sort of philosophically very interesting. And there wasn't a Big Bang in that theory, but somehow new material was created all the time in the form of hydrogen, and the universe kept on expanding, and there was room for more hydrogen. It was a rather philosophically nice picture. It was disproved when the Big Bang, well, when I say the Big Bang, this was theoretically discovered by people trying to solve Einstein's equations and apply it to cosmology. Einstein didn't like the idea. He liked a universe which was there all the time. And he had a model which was there all the time. But then there was this discovery, accidental discovery, a very important discovery, of this microwave background. And if there's the crackle on your television screen, which is already sensing this microwave background, which is coming at us from all directions. And you can trace it back and back and back and back. And it came from a very early stage of the universe. Well, it's part of the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory was when people tried to solve Einstein's equations. They really found you had to have this initial state where the universe, it was used to be called the primordial atom and things like this. There's Friedman and Lemaitre. Friedman was a Russian, Lemaitre was a Belgian, and they independently, well, basically Friedman first, and Lemaitre talked about the initial state, which is a very, very concentrated initial state, which seemed to be the origin of the universe.
Primordial atom.
Primordial atom is what he called it, yes. And then it became, well, Fred Hoyle used the term Big Bang in a kind of derogatory sense. He said, well,
Just like with the Schrodinger and the cats, right?
yes, it's like sort of got picked up on, whereas it wasn't his intention originally. But then the evidence piled up and piled up. And one of my friends, and I learned a lot from him when I was in Cambridge, was Dennis Sharma. He was a great proponent of steady state. And then he got converted. He said, no, I'm sorry. I had a great respect for him. He went around lecturing and said, I was wrong. The steady state model doesn't work. There was this Big Bang. And this microwave background that you see, okay, it's not actually quite the Big Bang. When I said not quite, it's about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. But that's what you see. But then you have to have had this Big Bang before it in order to make the equations work. And it works beautifully. Except for one little thing, which is this thing called inflation, which people had to put into it to make it work. When I first heard of it, I didn't like it at all.
What's inflation?
Inflation is that in the first... I'm going to give you a very tiny number. Think of a second. That's not very long. Now I'm going to give you a fraction of a second. 1 over a number. This number has 32 digits. Let's say between 36 and 32 digits. Tiny, tiny time between those two tiny, ridiculous seconds, fraction of a second. The universe was supposed to have expanded in this exponential way, an enormous way, for no apparent reason. You had to invent a particular thing called the inflaton field to make it do it. And I thought, this is completely crazy. There are reasons why people stuck with this idea. You see, the thing is that I formed my model for reasons which are very fundamental, if you like. It has to do with this very fundamental principle, which is known as the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says, more or less, things get more and more random as time goes on. Now, another way of saying exactly the same thing is things get less and less random. As things go back, as you go back in time, they get less and less random. So you go back and back and back and back, and the earliest thing you can directly see is this microwave background. What's one of the most striking features of it is that it's random. It has this, what you call this spectrum of, which is what's called the Planck spectrum, of frequencies, different intensities for different frequencies, and it's this wonderful curve due to Max Planck. And what's it telling you? It's telling you that the entropy is at a maximum. Started off at a maximum, and it's going up ever since. I call that the mammoth in the room. I mean, this is a paradox.
Mammoth, yeah, it is.
And so people, why don't cosmologists worry about this? So I worried about it. And then I thought, well, it's not really a paradox because you're looking at matter and radiation at a maximum entropy state. What you're not seeing directly in that is the gravitation. It's gravitation which is not thermalized. The gravitation is very, very low entropy. And it's low entropy by the uniformity. And you see that in the microwave too. It's very uniform over the whole sky. I'm compressing a long story into a very short few sentences.
And doing a great job, yeah.
So what I'm saying is that there's a huge puzzle. Why was gravity in this very low entropy state, very high organized state, everything else was all random? And that, to me, was the biggest problem in cosmology. The biggest problem? Nobody seems to even worry about it. People say they solved all the problems and they don't even worry about it. They think inflation solves it. It doesn't. It can't. Because it's just...
Just to clarify, that was your problem with the inflation describing some aspect of the moments right after the Big Bang?
Inflation is supposed to stretch it out and make it all uniform. It doesn't do it because you can only do it if it's uniform already at the beginning. You just have to look at it. I can't go into the details. But it doesn't solve it, and it was completely clear that it doesn't solve it.
But where does the conformal cyclic cosmology of starting to talk about something before that singularity?
Well, I was just thinking to myself, how boring this universe is going to be. You've got this exponential expansion. This was discovered early in this century, 21st century. People discovered that these supernova exploding stars showed that the universe is actually undergoing this exponential expansion. So it's a self-similar expansion. And it seems to be a feature of this term that Einstein introduced into his cosmology for the wrong reason. He wanted a universe that was static. He put this new term into his cosmology to make it make sense. It's called the cosmological constant. And then when he got convinced that the universe had a Big Bang, he retracted it, complaining that this was his greatest blunder. The trouble is it wasn't a blunder, it was actually right. Very ironic. And so the universe seems to be behaving with this cosmological constant. Okay, so this universe is expanding and expanding. What's going to happen in the future? Well, it gets more and more boring for a while. What's the most interesting thing in the universe? Well, it's black holes. The black holes more or less gulp down entire clusters of galaxies. It'll swallow up most of our galaxy. We will run into an Andromeda galaxy's black hole. That black hole will swallow our one. They'll get bigger and bigger, and they'll basically swallow up the whole cluster of galaxies. Gulp it all down. Pretty well all. Most of it. Maybe not all. Most of it. And then that'll happen there'll be just these black holes around. Pretty boring, but still not as boring as it's going to get. It's going to get more boring because these black holes, you wait, an unbelievable length of time, and Hawking's black hole evaporation starts to come in. And the black holes, it's incredibly tedious, finally evaporate away. Each one goes away, disappears with a pop at the end. What could be more boring? It was boring then. Now this is really boring. There's nothing, not even black holes. The universe gets colder and colder and colder and colder. And I thought, this is very, very boring. Now that's not science, is it? But it's emotional. So I thought, who's going to be bored by this universe? Not us, we won't be around. It'll be mostly photons running around. And what the photons do, they don't get bored because it's part of relativity, you see. It's not really that they don't experience anything, that's not the point. The photons get right out to infinity without experience any time. It's the way relativity works. And this was part of what I used to do in my old days when I was looking at gravitational radiation and how things behaved in infinity. Infinity is just like another place. You can squash it down. As long as you don't have any mass in the world, infinity is just another place. The photons get there. The gravitons get there. What do they get? They run into infinity. They say, well, now I'm here, what do I? There's something on the other side, is there? The usual view, it's just a mathematical notion. There's nothing on the other side. That's just the boundary of it. A nice example is this beautiful series of pictures by the Dutch artist M.C. Escher. You may know them. The one's called Circle Limits. They're a very famous one with the angels and the devils. And you can see them crowding and crowding and crowding up to the edge. Now, the kind of geometry that these angels and devils inhabit, that's their infinity. But from our perspective, infinity is just a place. Okay,
sorry, can you just take a brief pause?
Yes.
And just the word you're saying, infinity is just a place. So, for the most part, infinity, sort of even just going back,
yes,
infinity is a mathematical concept.
I think this is one.
Do you think there's an actual physical manifest? Like, in which way does infinity ever manifest itself in our physical universe?
Well, it does in various places. You see, it's a thing that if you're not a mathematician, you think, oh, infinity, I can't think about that. Mathematicians think about infinity all the time. Yeah. They get used to the idea and they just play around with different kinds of infinities and it becomes no problem. But you just have to take my word for it.
Got it.
Now, one of the things is, you take a Euclidean geometry. Well, it just keeps on going and it goes out to infinity. Now, there's other kinds of geometry, and this is what's called hyperbolic geometry. It's a bit like Euclidean geometry, it's a little bit different. It's like what Escher was trying to describe in his Angels and Devils. And he learned about this from Coxeter. And he think that's a very nice thing. I'll try and represent this infinity to this kind of geometry. So it's not quite Euclidean geometry, it's a bit like it, but the angels and the devils inhabit. And their infinity, by this nice transformation, you squash their infinity down, so you can draw it as this nice circle boundary to their universe. Now, from our outside perspective, we can see their infinity as this boundary. Now, what I'm saying is that it's very like that. The infinity that we might experience like those angels and devils in their world can be thought of as a boundary. Now, I found this a very useful way of talking about radiation, gravitational radiation, and things like that. It was a trick. Mathematical trick. So now what I'm saying is that mathematical trick becomes real. That somehow the photons, they need to go somewhere, because from their perspective, infinity is just another place. Now this is a difficult idea to get your mind around. So that's why one of the reasons cosmologists are finding a lot of trouble taking me seriously. But to me, it's not such a wild idea. What's on the other side of that infinity? You have to think, why am I allowed to think of this? Because photons don't have any mass. And we in physics have beautiful ways of measuring time. They are incredibly precise clocks. Atomic and nuclear clocks, unbelievably precise. Why are they so precise? Because of the two most famous equations of 20th century physics. One of them is Einstein's E equals mc squared. What's that tell us? Energy and mass are equivalent. The other one is even older than that, still 20th century, only just. Max Planck, E equals h nu. Nu is a frequency, h is a constant again like c, E is energy. Energy and frequency are equivalent. Put the two together, energy and mass are equivalent, Einstein, energy and frequency are equivalent, Max Planck. Put the two together, mass and frequency are equivalent. Absolutely basic physical principle. If you have a massive entity, a massive particle, it is a clock with a very, very precise frequency. It's not, you can't directly use it, you have to scale it down. So your atomic and nuclear clocks, but that's the basic principle. You scale it down to something you can actually perceive. But it's the same principle. If you have mass, you have beautiful clocks. But the other side of that coin is, if you don't have mass, you don't have clocks. If you don't have clocks, you don't have rulers. You don't have scale.
So you don't have space and time.
You don't have a measure of the scale of space and time.
Scale
So you have
space.
you do have the structure, what's called the conformal structure. You see, it's what the angels and devils have. If you look at the eye of the devil, no matter how close to the boundary it is, it has the same shape, but it has a different size. So you can scale up and you can scale down, but you mustn't change the shape. So it's basically the same idea, but applied to space-time now. In the very remote future, you have things which don't measure the scale, but the shape, if you like, is still there. Now that's in the remote future. Now I'm going to do the exact opposite. Now I'm going to go way back into the Big Bang. Now as you get there, things get hotter and hotter, denser and denser. What's the universe dominated by? Particles moving around almost with the speed of light. When they get almost with the speed of light, okay, they begin to lose the mass too. So for a completely opposite reason, they lose the sense of scale as well. So my crazy idea is the Big Bang and the remote future, they seem completely different. One is extremely dense, extremely hot. The other's very, very rarefied and very, very cold. But if you squash one down by this conformal scaling, you get the other. So although they look and feel very different, they're really almost the same. The remote future, on the other side, I'm claiming is that, where do the photons go? They go into the next Big Bang. You've got to get your mind around that crazy idea.
Taking a step on the other side of the place that is infinity. Okay,
Yes.
but
So I'm saying the other side of our Big Bang, now I'm going back into the Big Bang.
back.
There was the remote future of a previous eon.
Previous eon.
And what I'm saying is that previous eon, there are signals coming through to us which we can see and which we do see. And these are both signals, the two main signals are to do with black holes. One of them is the collisions between black holes, and as they spiral into each other, they release a lot of energy in the form of gravitational waves. Those gravitational waves get through in a certain form into the next eon.
That's fascinating that there's some, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that some information can travel
Yes,
from another eon.
exactly.
That is fascinating. I've seen somewhere described sort of the discussion of the Fermi paradox. You know, that if there's intelligent life,
Yes.
Being, communication immediately takes you there. So
We have
do
a
you think-
paper. I have my colleague Vahe Gurzajan, who I worked with this on these ideas for a while. We have a crazy paper on that. Yes.
So
Looking at the Fermi paradox. Yes.
right. So if the universes are just cycling over and over and over, punctuated by
Yep.
punctuated the singularity of the Big Bang,
Yes.
and then intelligent or any kind of intelligent systems can communicate through from eon to eon. Why haven't we heard anything from our alien friends?
Because we don't know how to look.
That's fundamentally the reason. Because
I don't know. You see, it's speculation. I mean, the SETI program is a reasonable thing to do, but still speculation. It's trying to say, okay, maybe not too far away was a civilization which got there first, before us, early enough that they could send us signals. But how far away would you need to go before? I mean, I don't know. We've so little knowledge about that. We haven't seen any signals yet, but it's worth looking. It's worth looking. What I'm trying to say, here's another possible place where you might look. Now you're not looking at civilizations which got there first. You're looking at those civilizations which were so successful, probably a lot more successful than we're likely to be by the looks of things, which knew how to handle their own global warming or whatever it is, and to get through it all and to live to a ripe old age in the sense of a civilization, to the extent that they could harness signals that they could propagate through for some reason of their own desires, whatever we wouldn't know, to other civilizations which might be able to pick up the signals. But what kind of signals would they be? I haven't the foggiest.
Let me ask the question.
Yes.
What to you is the most beautiful idea in physics or mathematics or the art at the intersection of the two?
I'm going to have to say complex analysis. I might have said infinities. One of the most beautiful idea, I think, was the fact that you can have infinities of different sizes and so on. But that's, in a way, I think, complex analysis. It's got so much magic in it. It's a very simple idea. You take these, you take numbers, you take integers, and then you fill them up as fractions and the real numbers. You imagine you're trying to measure a continuous line. And then you think of how you can solve equations. Then what about x squared equals -1? Well, there's no real number which satisfies that. So you have to think of, well, there's a number called I. You think you invent it. Well, in a certain sense, it's there already. But this number, when you add that square root of -1 to it, you have what's called the complex numbers. And they're an incredible system. If you like, you put one little thing in, you put square root of -1 in, and you get how much benefit out of it. All sorts of things that you'd never imagined before. And it's that amazing, all hiding there in putting that square root of -1 in.
So in a
I
sense,
think that's the most magical thing I've seen in mathematics or physics. And it's in quantum mechanics.
in quantum
You
mechanics.
see, it's there already. You might think, what's it doing there? Okay, just a nice beautiful piece of mathematics. And then suddenly we say, nope. It's the very crucial basis of quantum mechanics.
So on the
There in the way the world works.
So on the question of whether math is discovered or invented, it sounds like you may be suggesting that partially it's possible that math is indeed discovered.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's more like archaeology than you might think. Yes. Yes.
So let me ask the most ridiculous, or maybe the most important question. What is the meaning of life? What gives your life fulfillment, purpose, happiness, and meaning? Why do you think we're here on this? Given all the Big Bang and the infinities of photons that we've talked
All
about.
I would say, I think it's not a stupid question. I mean, there are some people, many of my colleagues who are scientists, and they say, oh, that's a stupid question. Meaning, well, we're just here because things came together and produced life and so on. I think there's more to it. But what there is that's more to it, really much idea.
And it might be somehow connected to the mechanisms of consciousness that we've been talking about, the mystery there.
Yeah. It's connected with all sorts of, I think these things are tied up in ways which are, you see, I tend to think the mystery of consciousness is tied up with the mystery of quantum mechanics and how it fits in with the classical world, and that's all to do with the mystery of complex numbers. And there are mysteries there, which look like mathematical mysteries, but they seem to have a bearing on the way the physical world operates. We're scratching the surface. We have a long, huge way to go before we really understand that.
And it's a beautiful idea that the depth, the mathematical depth, could be discovered. And then there's tragedies of Gato's incompleteness along the way that we'll have to somehow figure our ways around.
Yeah.
So, Roger, it was a huge honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Roger Penrose, and thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cash App. Please consider supporting this podcast by getting ExpressVPN at ExpressVPN.
Oh, was I?